Hello and welcome to another episode of Two Guys and a Chainsaw. I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
Well, this week's episode was suggested to me by a good friend. Big shout out to Liz, who suggested One Cut of the Dead. Told me nothing about it before I started watching it, and I didn't look anything up, but I did know that it was on Shudder. And since you and I both share a Shudder account, I knew that this was something we could watch. So thank you for the suggestion. And here we are. We are watching One Cut of the Dead, a Japanese zombie film, sort of, from 2017. Man, I had not heard about this, and I was really kind of surprised that I hadn't heard about it. I think probably one of the main reasons is just because it's Japanese.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we don't get a lot of exposure to world film in the USA, probably because there are just so many of them. And this one, you know, it's a good movie. I think it's a great movie. I'm just going to come out and say that right now. Certainly the internet thinks so, and the critics thought so. This is one of the few movies you can find on Rotten Tomatoes with a 100% approval rating. Mm-hmm. That's based on 86 reviews. And then it was shot on a $25,000 budget and ended up grossing $25 million, 1,000-point return on it in its native Japan. And then around the world, it's done pretty well. Again, didn't probably get much of a big release in the USA. Right now, your best bet to go see this movie is going to be on Shudder. And that is where we watched it. Had you ever heard of this movie before, Craig? You follow these websites a little more closely. Maybe you'd heard of this before somehow.
If I had, I don't remember. It did get a stateside theatrical release, which I think was unexpected. I don't think anybody expected it. This movie has an interesting production history. So you said this is what we're doing without consulting me.
Often is the case, and then you want to murder me afterwards because you hate it.
And that's the thing. So
wait a minute. So what you're going to say is, so I walked into this expecting to hate it.
Well, okay. All right. So I'll be completely honest. I wasn't really looking forward to it, because I'm one of those lame-ass Americans who doesn't love subtitles. Now, it's not because I don't like to read. I do, in fact, very much like to read. But if I'm going to read, I'll read a book. I don't want to read TV. And even... It's so stupid. I take all these notes. I take, tons and tons of notes, and then I usually barely even look at them when we're talking. So the subtitles pose an additional challenge because I'm constantly going back and forth between two screens, between my video screen and between, my computer screen, taking these notes. And I was afraid that I would miss stuff. Now, ultimately, I don't really think that I missed much, but watching the first 35, 37 minutes, I was like, Jesus Christ, he did it again. Like, why do I let him pick these horrible movies? And then after that 35 or 37 minutes, things changed. And that's one thing that I want to say from the beginning. Now, you said you knew nothing about it going in, and I think in the email that you sent me, you said, I've heard that you're better off not knowing anything about it going in. And so I didn't look it up. I didn't read anything either. I looked up the IMDb page to see how long it was, and it's not terribly long. It's a little over an hour and a half, which is perfectly fine. Yeah. I was very, very glad, ultimately, that I didn't know anything about it going in. So, if you are interested in watching this movie, and I think that you should be, I'll say that from the beginning, this movie is worth a watch. If you have not seen it and if you don't know anything about it, don't listen to this right now, because I'm sure that we will spoil important things very, very early on. And so, yeah, I'll kind of leave it at that for now. But yes, ultimately, I thought it was really good. Initially, okay, so it's called One Cut of the Dead. So I'm like, okay, I get it. And so we start watching it, and it seems like a cheesy zombie movie. it seems like it was made by, people who were doing it on the cheap and on the fly and for the love of it, and the production value wasn't good. It was all, I don't know, what do you call it, handy cam or whatever.
Yeah.
And so the video quality wasn't great. The acting was pretty bad. The effects and makeup were subpar. And I'm just thinking, oh my God, this is crap. But then when the initial and biggest twist was revealed, well, and while that was all going on, and because they were clearly doing it all in one cut, it wasn't an edited piece. It literally was one shot, and you could tell. And so what I was thinking and what I was preparing to say for the podcast was, it's ambitious and it's creative. They're not the only folks who have ever tried to make a movie in one cut. It's been done before. It's rare, but it's been done before. And so watching that, I was like, it's ambitious and it's creative, but that does not necessarily a good movie make. And this is not a good movie. So I was all ready to talk about it in those terms.
That's great. You had written down your notes already.
Yes.
Craig is like, one thumb down, ambitious, but falls short.
Yes. And then at about the 37-minute... so it's very typical in that first half hour. Like, they're in this spooky environment. It's an old, like, water filtration plant or something. The premise initially is that the people in the movie are making this cheap zombie movie, but then apparently something happens. It's suggested that the director, who is dissatisfied with their performances, does something to actually bring real zombies into the fray. And there's some mythology about how this place was said to be a place of, like, experimentation by the Japanese government, bringing people back from the dead. And it's suggested that the director does something to make these zombies rise. And then it's pretty typical. The zombies show up. They start chasing the lead actors around. Of course, as is always the case with these types of movies, you're like, seriously, the camera guy is still just, filming everything while all this is going on.
While also not getting attacked himself.
Somehow
Right.
miraculously avoiding being attacked himself the whole time. It was silly and it was typical, but par for the course for cheap zombie movies. And it was getting to about the half hour mark and then getting closer to the 35-minute mark. And I was like, seriously, there's an hour of this left. I have to watch another hour of this. And then it was over. And the title card came up and the credits started rolling. And I was like, what the fuck? Like, is there going to be like an hour retrospective about this movie at the end or something? And it wasn't. It wasn't that at all. It totally changed gears. And from that point on, I was like, oh shit, this really is clever.
Once again, if you haven't seen this movie, this is another safe stopping point. We're warning you, you could stop here and watch it and be totally surprised by what's going on. I mean, what really helped was, and I thought this was especially clever, was that, as you said, the movie within the movie is kind of a meta movie itself, right? It's a movie about this director, like you said, who has scouted out this location. It's supposed to be this big military thing. The first thing we see is a zombie attacking a girl, basically cornering her into the edge of what looks like almost like a gymnasium.
Yeah.
And she's holding an axe out and she's crying, and he's very slowly stumbling towards her. It looks bad. And then she's like, no, and then he stops. And then it's like this was one of her former lovers. And so she kind of reaches out to him and starts to touch his fingers. And then he comes at her again. Anyway, she's doing a poor job, and this is really dumb. And eventually, you hear cut, and the director pops in, and he starts berating her. Mm-hmm. You are lousy. Why can't you act like you didn't feel it? You were just acting like none of this is realistic. And then he turns around. Eventually, the guy playing the zombie kind of comes over, and the director turns to him and grabs the scruff of his neck and says, "And you know, in your rehearsals, you're pretty boy. You have no talent. Hack, blah blah blah." And screams at him as well and storms off.
And hits him.
Hits him. That's right. That's right. He hits him. It's so good. This is what's great about this, is that there's so many payoffs to come later. They go up the stairs. Ko was the name of the boy. Chinatsu is the name of the girl. And then there's this PA named Nao. She, is kind of doing their makeup. They're taking a break, and she mentions the fact they're casually talking about, where did they get this creepy location, and she mentions that the director actually found it. It took him forever to find it all over Japan, and supposedly during World War II, there were these experiments where the army was working with reanimating the dead. And then there's suddenly a bang at the door that startles them all. But sort of nothing happens. And so then they're like, well, that was weird. And then there's just this long pause. And finally, the guy speaks up and says,
"Do you have any hobbies?"
"Do you have any hobbies?" And I was like going, oh my God, you've got to be kidding me. And it's funny because actually Chinatsu speaks up and says that. She goes, "That's a random question." And he's like, "Well, we're just trying to have fun here." Now jumps up and's like, "Well, actually, I'm learning self-defense right now." And he's like, "Oh, really? Why don't you show me some?" "Okay." And so she gets up and it's like, "Now approach me from the front." And she twists his arm. "Oh, that's horrible." "Now approach me from the back." "Oh, that's horrible." Finally, there's another bang. Anyway, what ends up happening? Gosh, there's no way we can walk you through all of this.
No, but it's funny, and I understand why you want to, because there are so many little things that you notice in the beginning that you just kind of scratch your head about. Like, after that, a zombie comes in. And they fight the zombie. But meanwhile, there's this other guy, like I feel like he's supposed to be another production assistant or something, and he's just sitting in the corner, like watching all of this go down. Like everybody else is freaking out. And there's this one guy just sitting there, and I'm like, why is he just sitting there? Like, he's not reacting at all. And eventually, he kind of tries to sneak out, and by that point, the director's back, and the director grabs him and shakes him. He's like, "Where are you going?" And so, like the random "what are your hobbies" question, and like this guy randomly sitting there are all these little tiny things that just in the back of my mind, I'm like, oh my God, this is a terrible movie. Like,
right. Well, and I was thinking, well, maybe this is going to get more clever, because the director does pop in and go, "Aha, see, now I'm finally getting good reactions from you." And it's funny, actually. I thought it was hilarious, because they're presumably being attacked by these real zombies, and now it's like, "You didn't do it, did you?" And he's like, "Yes, I put the blood on the roof." It's like, "Oh my God," and you release the actual zombies. Like, "Yes, now we're finally getting real reactions. This is going to be a great movie." And so now you realize sort of the conceit is that the director has concocted this found footage film together by unleashing real zombies. And I was really questioning that the whole way through, like, come on, it can't really be that, or is it,
Well,
so I thought maybe that was where the movie was going to go, with suddenly kind of giving me a twist that would explain it.
And it was funny because, from that point, basically, the zombies just chase them around for the next 20 minutes. All of the members of the crew, get dispatched in various ways. And then, of course, they're zombies and they're chasing them all around. What was the most funny to me is that at the most random times when they're getting attacked by zombies, the director would just burst in and go, "Action!" And he'd be saying things to the zombies like, "Get that bitch!"
And
so funny.
And then there are these moments where it's like the camera is just focused. So it's towards the end of it. This, I think Ko and Chinatsu are up on the roof, and Nao is up there, and Nao's kind of going ballistic because apparently Chinatsu has been cut or bit on her ankle, and they noticed that. And so Nao wants to kill her with this axe.
Right, and she goes nuts. Like, out of nowhere, her character just totally changes, and
Completely.
and I had in my notes, like, is she a zombie now? Because all of a sudden she's super aggressive and violent, and she's chasing Chinatsu around, and they end up on the roof, and there's a big scuffle, and then Ko kills Now with an axe, and Chinatsu runs away and ends up in a shed that's marked with a pentagram on the ground. And these it's a close up on her, and these zombie legs come into frame and just stand right next to her for a second as she's cowering in fear. And then they turn around and go away. And I'm like, what is happening? This is so weird. And it ends up with Chinatsu back up on the roof somehow for some reason, facing off with Ko. And it ends up, Ko apparently is a zombie now. And so basically, they are in real life reenacting the scene that they were shooting in the very opening scene. And the director is there, and he's like, yes, this is the real reaction. This is how you would really be feeling. She ends up, gosh, I don't even remember, Now jumps back up out of nowhere with an axe in her head for just a second, and then just falls away again, and I had no idea what was going on there. And the director, I feel like, gets killed somehow. Now kills Ko. And another thing that I noticed, but that didn't really strike me as weird, is that most of the big kills happen off camera.
Sure.
Or they're obscured by something, so all that you really see is the blood flying. You don't really see graphic, intense special effects or anything.
And there's a great moment in there, too, because the camera's, again, this is all one take, so the camera's running after them, and blood actually splatters up on the lens of the camera. And there's blood on the scene for a while. And I thought, okay, how is this going to happen? And during one of the chases, a hand comes in and actually wipes the blood off of the lens.
I loved it. I loved that.
I loved that bit. And I later read in the trivia that was actually real. Like, they didn't add that later. All of that actually happened. This movie was, like I said, it was shot for $25,000. The whole thing is a very low-budget production, so everything that we saw on the screen, I don't think there's anything digital about it whatsoever. So,
well, and the way that the movie, I'm air quoting as I say that, the way that the movie ends is she kills Ko, and then she ends up standing on this huge pentagram made with blood on the roof, and there's like a crane shot, like the camera moves up so that it's shooting her from above, and she's just standing there, and that's when the credits roll, and I had no idea what was going on. Really, seriously, I was sitting here thinking, what is happening? I have no idea what's happening. But I did think that up to that point, even though it was bad, like it was kind of poorly made, I thought, well, it was fun.
Yeah.
You know, like there was a lot of action, a lot of running, and the camera's running, and the zombies are chasing. It's all very unrealistic. Like there's one point where Chinatsu is in an underground tunnel, and there are zombies at either side, so the tension is very high, but then she just kind of skirts around one of them and keeps running. I didn't think that it was amazing, but I thought, okay, well, you know, for what they were doing, it was interesting.
You were writing your notes that said, you know, Craig Higgins, one thumb down, good effort, but not a good movie. However, if you had a Halloween party, and you had this playing in the background,
well, no,
drinking some beers with your buddies.
Yes, kind of. But actually what I was thinking was the reason that I find this fun is because I thought that you and I could get our friends together and make this movie.
Exactly.
So that was kind of fun. But then the credits roll and it fades to white, and I had no idea what was going on. And then, because like the title card comes up and the credits roll, I'm like, what is going on? And then it fades back onto a city. And this is when the twist is revealed. And it also says 3 months earlier. And it jumps back to when the director of this movie is being pitched the movie. And all of a sudden, the cinematography is far more traditional, way cleaner, way sharper. It looks like an actual movie as opposed to something that somebody shot on their iPhone. And that's where we figure out what's going on. And I will concede that this is mentioned in the IMDb trivia, but I really thought of it before I read it. It turns out that this movie is the horror equivalent of Noises Off, the play.
Yes. That's exactly what I was thinking when I was watching it. Because I was involved in a production of Noises Off.
It's a great play.
Oh, it's hilarious. It's like you see the play from the rehearsal is like Act 1, and then Act 2, you watch a production of the play from backstage, and you've gotten a sense from the first act how wacky these characters are in their rehearsal and all of their little quirks and issues and problems with each other, and there's all kinds of drama going on. So then you can see backstage as they're trying to put on this farce, which is, doors opening and closing and kind of madcap farce. It's just as madcap backstage as they're like sabotaging each other and they're like pissed off at each other and things go wrong and they've got to cover for it and all that. And then you see it finally, the third act, I think, is like the closing night of this play. And it's from the front, the actual production, and you can tell that the production itself has just kind of devolved into shambles.
Right.
It's just hilarious. And you're right, this is exactly that, just in zombie movie world.
Right. So what we saw was the movie that was made. We saw the production that aired. And as it was pitched to him by these executives, they wanted a half-hour long, live, one-cut zombie film. And when they pitched it to this director, he laughed. He thought they were kidding. And they're like, no, we're serious.
Well, and I love it because they tell him, like, why they chose him. Like, because all he's ever done are, like, some music videos and some small documentaries. And he says, well, what is your catchphrase again? Fast, cheap, and average.
Yeah.
And that's why we picked you.
And that's what they want. They want something fast, cheap, and average. They want cheap entertainment. And it's funny. So we see what I will call Act 2. We get to meet the actual actors and all of the people involved in the production before the production.
Yeah.
And the actor who plays Ko is this pretty boy, heartthrob kind of guy. He's a total snob and a douchebag. The girl who plays Chinatsu is this up-and-coming star who is very sweet and very pretty, but also kind of prissy and is really concerned about, like, what her agency will allow. Like, you can't spray anything on my face. It's not that I care, but my agency won't allow it. And we meet the director and his family.
Yeah.
And they seem like a nice, average family. The daughter is, I would guess, late teens, early 20s. She still lives at home, and she's interested in filmmaking, too. And she, I think, is working as a PA on other productions and stuff. And the wife seems a little bit, I'm making this more deep than it is, but she seems a little bit lost. Like, she used to be an actress, but she's not anymore, and she's, been exploring all these different hobbies, but she's not really found anything that's really caught her interest, and the daughter is trying to encourage her to get back into acting and stuff. And then some of the smaller characters who we had seen as zombies in the movie, like, one of them is a big drunk, we find out. Another one of them has irritable bowel syndrome. And if he drinks the wrong water, he will have horrible diarrhea.
That was the best part.
And that goes on for about 15 minutes, I would say. Until then, we get to the shooting of the production. And when we see the shooting of the production, all of these things that we've learned about these people, first of all, it's live, and two of the actors get caught in traffic or something and can't show up. So the director has to step in to play the director in the movie. And his wife, who's just visiting the set with the daughter because the daughter's obsessed with the actor who plays Ko, volunteers her to play now the PA makeup artist.
Right.
So they get thrown in at the very last minute. And then we get to see the first act again, but from behind the scenes. And all of those weird things that were going on and making us scratch our heads when we were watching it the first time are explained, and it's hilarious. Like, I was laughing out loud, and that takes quite a bit for me. I thought it was really, really funny.
It was laugh out loud funny. Like, for example, that awkward bit at the beginning where there's a bang at the door, but nothing happens. And so then Ko asks, now, so what are your hobbies? They had to improvise that because their zombie was supposed to come in the door, but this was the drunk guy zombie. And the director outside runs and finds that he's laying on the ground, not standing up, totally drunk, and he's like picking him up and trying to wake him up, and they've got like a PA, like an assistant there, and is trying to drag him to the door to try to get him to go through the door. So the best he can do is bang on the door and walk away. And then an assistant from behind the camera shows a big sign that says improvise, something's going bad. And this happens a few times, which is hilarious, right? This little, like, there'll be a PA who's giving directions to them from something they've written on a piece of paper, some placard. So that's why now jumps up and is like, well, I'm learning self-defense.
Right.
and which is something
because she had been that was one of the hobbies that she was exploring in her real life. It was so funny because like she shows, you know, how you protect yourself from the front, but then the real joke is when somebody comes and grabs you from behind, you throw your arms up to get out of their grip and you yell something. I don't remember what
Pow.
She yelled, like pow or something.
Yeah.
And then she keeps doing it throughout. Because she kind of goes crazy. Like, it's established that she stopped acting because she would get so into it that she couldn't control herself. That's what happens here. And so people keep trying to grab her to restrain her, and she just keeps throwing her arms up. Pow! So funny. We can't do it justice.
No.
You have to see it. But I'm telling you, it is hilarious. And all of those little things, like, you know, I was wondering, why is that guy just sitting there, like, while all of this is going on? Well, the reason is because he's the diarrhea guy, and he's got diarrhea, so he's trying not to shit himself. and he finally tries to sneak out, and the director's like, where are you going? And he runs out, and when he ran out the first time, we heard him screaming, no, no! And so we just assumed that he was getting killed by a zombie, but the truth is, he was shitting himself. And there was a hilarious scene where, like, the director runs out after him, and we see the behind the scenes stuff where he just has to squat on the ground, and you hear the pooping. Like, at one point he's standing there talking to the director, and he's like, it's coming out. And the director's like, what's coming out? Poop. And then he's squatting on the ground because there are no bathrooms around, and the director makes the PA, another PA, put zombie makeup on him while he's pooping on the ground so that they can turn him into a zombie to bring him back to explain what had happened. Like, they're desperately trying to keep this going, and they're jumping off and on script. At one point, they're so off script, nobody knows where they are. And in the booth people are like, we're going to have to just cut it. We're going to have to cut to a card that says we're having technical difficulties, and we'll try to get things back together. And the director's daughter, who is interested in filmmaking, says, no, we can do this. And, like, she jumps in with a plan. She's like, send so-and-so back in, and then we'll jump from page 11 to page 16 and just keep going from there. And they communicate with the actors via cue cards, which also explains those awkward pauses and silences from the movie. It's because they don't know what's going on, and they're reading cue cards telling them what to do next.
Like, at one time, the cameraman is holding the camera, but he kind of turns back and sees a cue card there and has to flip the page to the next page. Oh, there's so many great little touches in here. And that zombie leg that you had described earlier when she was cowering in the shed, but that zombie leg came up. It was one of the production staff who stepped up there and was holding a cue card in front of her saying, "Go get an axe." And so she, as soon as he leaves, she runs out of there. And in the movie, she goes and she picks up an axe and goes, "Oh, an axe. Lucky me."
Well, and it's all, like you said, we can't go through it step by step, but it's all very contrived is the right word, but that has a negative connotation. It's just, it's like Noises Off. It's so well planned. Like when the actress who plays now, when she goes crazy, they have to figure out a way to get her out. So they kill her off with an axe off screen, and then the axe ends up embedded in her head. But they realize that they need an axe later in the movie, so they have to take it out of her head and plant it, and then tell the girl to find it. Like they're problem solving as they go along. And I think that is what really endeared the movie to me, is that ultimately, whereas it felt so bad and so amateur in the first part, in the third act, you could tell that this was so meticulously planned. The first act and the third act literally, you could watch them if you had two different screens. You could start them at the same time, and you could see what was going on screen for the viewers, and you could see what was going on behind the scenes, and they align seemingly perfectly.
Yeah.
And the fact that, with all of this craziness going on, and the director trying to do his directorial duties while also having to be in the movie, and so he's running around like a crazy person, and everybody is.
Yeah.
They're making it work, and the execs who are watching it from a booth are like, "Oh, this is so much fun."
Well, everything, one of the last lines of the movie is one of them standing up and going, "Well, everything worked out beautifully."
It went off without a hitch, I think she says.
But part of what's endearing about it is the subject matter, right? It's like you said at the beginning, when you were watching the first part, you were thinking, well, it's bad, but hey, this is something we would have gotten together and could have made ourselves. So that makes it a little endearing. This is that same spirit, right? Hey, these guys are trying to make this movie, and they're falling all over themselves to do it right, and they're making the best out of what they have. It's just really charming and fun and funny. It's just a fun movie.
Well, and that's something else that is just endearing. After I watched it, I went and read about it, and this movie is the result of like a writing and directing workshop. All of these people, all of the actors involved in this were amateurs who paid money to take part in this workshop. And so essentially they paid to be in the movie.
Yeah.
I don't remember how they raised $25,000 is a lot of money to me, but for film production, that's
it's nothing. It's like it's not even going to cover food. But I think it was crowdfunded. A lot of it was, not all of it, but a lot of it was actually crowdfunded.
Yeah, and so they made it for $25,000. They were all basically amateurs doing this to invest in and further their craft, and it was released on like a few screens in Japan, and not much happened. But then I think that they submitted it for festivals, and it did really well at festivals, and then they did a second release in Japan, and it did really, really well, and then it got a worldwide release. Like, this almost never happens.
Yeah.
It does happen, but almost never. And that, I don't know, being somebody who is into the arts, and when I participate in things like this, I've only done a couple of student films, but I've done a lot of like community theater. Like, you don't really get into it thinking that it's going to be anything more than entertaining for your very limited audience and satisfying for you as a performer. And I imagine that that's what these people were thinking when they got into it. This was going to be kind of a stepping stone, a silly little thing that they did. And then it just blew up and made 1,000 times more than it cost to make. Wow. I'm just super impressed.
Me too. It was funny reading the trivia about that one take in the beginning. The whole movie was was shot in 8 days.
Yeah.
But the first, movie within a movie took 2 of those 8 days, and 6 takes for the cast and crew to get right. And apparently, they actually got it perfect on the second take, except there was some issue with a camera error, and one of the cameras stopped, so they couldn't even use it.
Right, which would be unfortunate. And that in itself really is impressive, because it was, a 35 to 37 minute scene. Now, if it was like it all took place in that one room, I would think, okay, well, that's reasonable. It's, you're basically filming a play, but it's not. They move around. There are multiple set pieces, multiple angles, special effects, makeup changes, like significant makeup changes and effects that are going on in real time. That is impressive.
It is.
That is really impressive.
It's a lot to coordinate. It's a lot of crew that have to run around and just stay out of shot of the camera, but be back there to help support and run sound and all this stuff. And then apparently also a behind-the-scenes guy behind all that with a GoPro who also has to stay out of the way.
Right.
Because after the credits of the movie roll, the real movie, finally when we're done, you get to see some of the behind-the-scenes of that actual...
Of the behind-the-scenes.
It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, really, really great. I would highly recommend it for anybody, really. You don't even have to be a horror fan. You just have to be able to take a bunch of cheesy zombie fake blood stuff.
Yeah, ultimately, it's a difficult movie to categorize because it does have, a lot of blood splatter. I mean, it's obviously fake. And like I said, there's not a lot of graphic violence on screen, but you do see the aftermath, and that's something else that I really enjoyed too. And I think that horror fans would enjoy seeing a lot of how some of this stuff is done, where you've got live actors in a scene, and then just through creative camera work, you have production assistants off camera throwing fake bodies and severed heads and severed arms into the scene.
Spitting blood in people's faces.
Right, through hoses. Like, I loved that. Like, when Chinatsu is hacking up Ko at the end, she's behind a short... It's not a wall, but she's behind something so that you can see her from approximately the waist up. And so you can see her as she's lifting the axe, but then as she takes it down, the blood just splatters on her face. And when we get to see the behind the scenes, it's just a guy crouched down there with a hose in his mouth, taking big swigs of blood and then shooting them through the hose. And it looks great.
It looks great.
It looks fantastic.
And it's a payoff for that gag where she was like, things can't spray on my face. Getting loads of it.
Oh, gosh. Oh, and just little things like in the first part of the movie, you hear people say things like, "Who are you?" Because random zombies or PAs are just jumping in to try to get things back on track, and the actors have no idea what's going on. And it's so frantic in the moment that those lines just fly by. But then when you see it later, you understand what's going on, and that the actors have no idea what's happening. One of my favorites, we talked about how in the movie within a movie, now just out of nowhere goes nuts. Well, that's because the actress kind of gets lost in her character and goes nuts. And so they're all chasing her around, yelling at her to stop. And eventually her husband, the director, has to grab her, pull her off scene, and choke her out so that she is unconscious. And then while she's unconscious, to explain what happened to her, they have to get her into zombie makeup and put an axe in her head. And so in the movie later, in the very last scene when she pops up out of nowhere, that's just because the actress regained consciousness and had no idea what was going on. So she just jumped up in the middle of the scene. And we see later in the behind the scenes stuff that her husband just grabbed her by the waist and pulled her back out of scene. And there's no explanation for it in the movie within the movie, but and there are other things like that too.
One of my favorite bits is when the cameraman gets whacked. I'm not exactly sure how it happens, but he gets knocked out or something, or gets injured, and he falls on the ground. In the movie within the movie, it seems like a cool kind of found footage type trope, right? Where the camera gets knocked out of someone's hand for a brief moment, and it's right there on the ground, but it still manages to film most of the scene before it gets picked back up again. Well, in the behind the scenes, we see that this guy was incapacitated, and this woman who I think was kind of aspiring to be a camera person, or was really interested in that, but just completely out of her league, like looks left, looks right, and she's the only person there who can like pick up the camera and run with it. So she picks it up and totally runs with it, and even while she's running through the fields, like slips and falls. Oh.
Another, and one of my other favorites was the drunk actor. Like, he promises that he's not going to drink through the shooting, but then somebody brings a bottle of like fancy sake to the set and he finds it, and so he is literally like passed out, and the director has to basically just hold him by the waist and kind of marionette him through his scenes. And it's so funny because like he's got him around the waist and he's trying to stay low and stay out of shot, which he does. So in the movie, it just looks like this guy is shambling like a zombie. But when you see what's really happening, I mean, he's just barely lucid at all. And the reason that he's moving that way is because somebody is holding him by the waist and just puppeteering him through the scenes. Very clever. So clever. This is not a movie that I ever would have watched. Now, maybe if there were a dubbed version, maybe I would have watched it, but it's unlikely that I would have watched it otherwise. And I'm really, really glad that I did. But again, I think a lot of the joy of it came from the unexpectedness of what happened. I didn't know what was going on. And I think that it was an experience.
Yeah.
You know, like the whole experience of watching the first part and being pissed off at you for picking another stupid ass movie, and then it shifting into something else that I wasn't expecting at all, and then that thing that I wasn't expecting at all ultimately being really well done and really clever. Like, it was such a great payoff. Man, I just really enjoyed it. I don't know that I would necessarily recommend it to everybody, but I think that fans of horror or especially horror comedy, or even people who are just fans of kind of farce and slapstick comedy who can handle a little bit of fake gore. Absolutely. And man, aspiring filmmakers, oh yeah, watch this, check it out. Like, I just so clever. I ended up walking away from it with a great big smile on my face.
And I finally feel redeemed.
Yeah. Don't get Don't get too full of yourself. It was a diamond in the rough.
I need a few more movies like this to break us even. Well, and a big shout out to Liz also for recommending this film to us. Really, really grateful again to get recommendations from people of things that we probably, like you said, would not have found on our own. If you have a request for us, please send us a message. You can find us online. You just have to search by Google Two Guys and a Chainsaw podcast. You will find our Facebook page, our Twitter account, and our website. You can simply leave us a comment or message there. Let us know what you thought of this movie, or send us a request for a movie we should do later. Until next time, I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
With Two Guys and a Chainsaw.